Well, welcome everyone. We're on our third broadcast now for emotional and mental health with the COVID crisis. And tonight we're going to be talking to Dr. Joannie DeBrito from Focus on the Family. And I'll do a more formal introduction of her in a few moments. And then Glenn Stanton has been a guest on this program before, and we're so glad Glenn's back. And at popular demand, Glenn, I want to remind you of that. I've said it to you before, but we had a lot of people say, when's that Glenn guy coming back on? We love to listen to him. And so great to have both of you tonight. And so we're going to give our audience about 3-4 more minutes to kind of tune in, because people are doing that as we're talking right now. But Joannie, it's great to see you. And you live in Colorado Springs?
I do. Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you. We're honored to have you. And I'm so looking forward to everything you'll have to say. And do you have any hobbies?
Oh, sure. There are all kinds of things I love to do. I love to cook and entertain and dance, and I'm pretty musical, so I like that. I hike and bike in Colorado, and I love all things water and snow. So swimming, I love swimming. I don't get to swim as much now, but I do get to enjoy the snow. It never snows too much for me. It can snow the middle of July and I'm happy. I love the snow.
Well, that's great. And when I visit there, we used to live there too, but I really enjoy all those things too. And I hear it's one of the most healthy cities as far as, exercise and like that in America.
Colorado is a really healthy state overall. You see people out hiking and jogging and rock climbing and that kind of thing all the time.
Well, I like to wander through Garden of the Gods and just look and think and find a rock to sit on.
Yep, it's beautiful there. One of my daughters lives very close to the Garden of the Gods, and we walk there a lot.
Well, Joannie, it's really good to have you. Thank you. And Glenn, what are your hobbies?
Well, my thing is I have quite a few of them, but I only do sports where the likelihood of breaking bones or bleeding is right there. So it's mountain biking, very, very fast down hills. And I grew up skateboarding. I still skateboard. We have a great park near my house, and I skate ramps and pools and things like that. Not quite like I used to, but I can still go up on vert and do all that kind of stuff. So I love it. And then the other safe thing is read. I read like crazy. So,
well, I mean, you're a high risk guy then. And also you get into big debates on university campuses about very interesting topics where I wondered, why doesn't Glenn get beat up? He's such a nice guy, but you go head to head with the best.
You know what? It is a lot of fun. And I go, what we believe as Christians in terms of, belief in God and Christian values and, especially issues of gender and things like that. I get to go to college campuses and secular college campuses and contend for what we believe. And people ask me like, Glenn, how in the world do you do that? How can you stand that? And I just see it as a wonderful challenge to go articulate for what it is we believe. And I don't see it as a fight or an argument, but an opportunity to persuade, an opportunity to get people to think differently. And so I'm kind of wired weird that way. And I love doing it. And it's so funny because so oftentimes they'll go to like, oh, wow, those Christians were smart because they sent the smart guy, as if, Christians aren't smart people, Right. And I'm like, no, I'm just like anybody else at Focus where I came from. So it's fun to kind of break those stereotypes.
Well, you wrote a great book called Loving My LGBTQ Neighbor. And I've read it. I've given it out to a lot of people. I've recommended it all over the place. And you actually go on this, debate that issue, but you're such a gentle debater and you have such a kind demeanor in your voice tone. I think when someone else would have a, octave above normal, you kind of bring a calm to it. And so, well, anyway, we are so glad to have both of you. If I could just read a little bit of an introduction about you and some of the topics we're going to talk about tonight. But Glenn, you're the director of Global Family Formation Studies at Focus on the Family. And as I mentioned, you've lectured and debated extensively on issues of gender, sexuality, marriage, and parenting at university level, state universities, Christian universities. I know I had you speak at one university as well. And then you served also with the George Bush administration for many years as a consultant on the increasing fatherhood involvement at the Head Start program. So thank you for all you do. And I often introduce you when I'm talking about you. I say he's one of the finest research people I've ever met. In fact, I don't know of a better one than Glenn on these kind of topics. And Dr. Joannie, forgive me for not pronouncing your last name.
That's okay.
DeBrito.
You got it. You got it.
Portuguese and Italian.
Right.
And Joannie, you're a licensed marriage and family therapist, and you do have a PhD, and you're a licensed clinical social worker with over 30 years of experience. You provide individual, couple, family therapy, directing counseling, and human service programs. You're also with Focus on the Family, and you came out with a document that every parent should have, and that's called Alive and Thrive. And it's a biblically based suicide prevention and response kind of program. And I've gone through it. I've looked at it. I've not seen anything better than it. It's second.
Oh, thank you.
It's wonderful, and I wish every parent had it. But we're so thrilled to have both of you tonight. And I get calls. I have pastors calling me. I have different leaders calling me, and all the thoughts around suicide and loneliness and isolation are part of what young people are feeling. It's very common. I was listening to a secular talk show the other day, and it said 70% of America's young people are struggling with mental health issues right now. It's like off the chart. And so a lot of parents are looking for answers, and they don't know what to do. They want to help their children. And I believe you mentioned earlier when we were talking that on your helpline at Focus on the Family, from parents, it's like a high percentages about their kids, their high school, college age kids, junior high too, and they don't know what to do. Their behavior, their patterns, their habits, their thinking, they get in isolation, they're worried about their depression. All of that's part of that, but parents are worried. And
They are.
Young people don't know exactly what to do in this loneliness, lack of social networking, with their friends personally. And so you guys are the best. And so, Glenn, you have some research on some of the really good points of what's going on and also some bad points. And would you mind sharing that a little bit with us?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, I want to say, Joannie, we have a surprise with you being here, because your boss was supposed to be with us tonight.
He was.
He has COVID.
Yep.
And I was actually glad not glad that he's sick, but I'm glad that you got to step in because I think, just your dimensions and what you have to offer, I think is super, super good for the audience tonight. So I'm glad that you're with us tonight. Yeah, Wade, it's interesting that, as you look at research sociologically with young people and families, one of the things that always fascinates me is that the research is often quite different than what we hear generally in the media, and that it is seldom as bad as we think it is. Okay. Right. And I want to share some good news. There was some good research that was done. In fact, for this California audience, there is a just leading scholar. Her name's Jean Twenge. She has studied, she's a mom. She has studied, teens and teen culture like crazy. She's from San Diego State University. I know her, I've met her, had dinner with her. She did a study with a number of other scholars looking at how kids were doing during the COVID pandemic. Right. And surprisingly, what she found is that like up to 53% of kids reported that actually they were feeling better and stronger and more resilient than they were last year, 2019.
Wow.
And they asked them why, and they said, really it was two things, and two things surprising. One, the kids were getting more sleep, that they weren't having to get up, and that sleep and sleep deprivation is a significant factor in driving depression in kids. And so when the kids, have to go from bed to their computer in school, they gain about an hour, and so they can sleep better. And Dr. Twenge and her team were finding out that, the increased sleep time for kids was having an effect, a positive effect on their mental health and well-being. The other was a wonderful point that even though they were not in school and they were not as often around their friends, the kids were saying, I'm spending more time with my mom and dad. And even like, my mom bugs me, my dad bugs me, they're always telling me to do this. They were indicating that the time with their parents, that face-to-face time, that connection time, more dinner time, was having a positive impact upon them. I mean, even when their parents, were kind of in their face, getting them to do things. So it's interesting that in one sense, kids are doing better than we think they are during this COVID pandemic. But the other is we have to all understand COVID has hit all of us tough. We are all struggling. I mean, myself, I think, like, Glenn, get a hold of yourself, pull yourself together, we all have to understand that we're struggling in those ways.
So
and our
true.
kids are facing struggles. Our kids are facing depression and loneliness and isolation. But the research that I'm seeing indicates that it is not necessarily as negative in all ways that we tend to think that it is. Another interesting thing that Dr. Twenge found and her team is that social media use did not skyrocket necessarily. It has remained about what it was, been the last 2 or 3 years. Now, television watching and, online streaming of shows, Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, those kinds of things have increased. But kids that are active on social media, an interesting distinction there between passive social media, just scrolling through Facebook or Instagram or whatever without any intention, that's not such a good thing, but that hasn't increased. But active social involvement, interacting with your friends, writing them, telling jokes, sharing videos, things like that, really interacting, that has been pretty significant. So, Joni will talk a little bit more about, some of the negative things, but I want parents to know that the increased time that your kids are able to spend with you just in the kitchen, in the living room, bumping into them in the halls as you're going back and forth. I mean, there's something significantly positive that is happening there. And the other is reach out and touch your kids, hug your kids, wrestle with your kids. Even if they're in their 20s, I have kids that are, in their 20s, they're all, moved and grown away, but they want that physicality. They want that kind of touch. And the research from Dr. Twenge and other people are saying that interaction with family time is richer and more profound than we can really imagine as parents.
Yeah, and Glenn, I would add to that. I agree. I've seen a lot of negative effects, but I would love to say too that I've seen a lot of positive effects. Now, you've already pointed to the research. I'm going to report anecdotal things, but I'll tell you what, just going on walks around the neighborhood, I have seen dads out in the street playing baseball and soccer with their kids. I haven't seen that for years. I hear parents talking about board games that are out on the table and they've played it for days on end, like the Monopoly game that keeps going on and on and on, and they're all together. I hear families talking about eating together more often because mom and dad are at home and they don't have to worry about commute time. They're actually eating. The kids haven't been in all those activities that take them away from one another. And so I've seen that. I've actually seen whole families that, hard to believe, but whole families walking in the neighborhood. And it's been so refreshing to see mom, dad, and kids. And I'm not just talking about little kids, But teenagers who are so often trying to distance themselves from mom and dad, walking,
Exactly.
talking, and actually enjoying themselves. So I think a part of probably what's going on is that for kids who are doing well before the pandemic, there are lots of things that are going well. I suspect that the kids who are having a lot of difficulty were probably kids who were having difficulty previous, and the stress has made things worse for them. So it's not necessarily a new group of people that are struggling. It's more that it's made it more difficult for those kids. That's my guess.
And Joni, it's interesting. I mean, you highlighted that the kids enjoying that. We think as
Yes.
parents, like,
Yes.
okay, please just go for a walk with us and be nice. And
Yeah.
the kids are like, no, that was really
Yeah.
nice. It was really nice that we got to spend time together.
Yeah. Let me tell you one very quick little story. I used to run a college counseling center. And of course, totally normal on the first day of what we call weekend of welcome, when the kids are coming to campus, the parents would be kind of traumatized. They were leaving their kids. They didn't want to leave their kids. And of course, the kids had that very typical, either they were kind of distant, doesn't matter. But anyway, I would be giving instructions about the counseling center is here for your kids. You can come in and talk. And the truth is, the vast majority of people who came in were parents, not the kids. And so the kids were kind of like, bye, mom and dad, don't let the door hit you on the way out. And the parents would go, okay. And then they'd turn around and just the tears would come. And they assumed that their kids didn't want to have anything else to do with them. Well, guess what? 6 weeks into this semester, when the kids are starting to have roommate issues and so forth, what happens? I miss my mom. I miss my dad. They really do want to engage with you. They don't want you to control their lives, but they do want to continue to have that relationship.
So true. You mentioned, Joni, if kids were struggling before COVID, their likelihood of them struggling during COVID is
right.
A reality too. I also think of parents that maybe there was a dysfunctional family, maybe there were even some abuse issues. And so probably some of that have escalated. I know our divorce statistics have been going up and stuff like that. So it might be a time where there's an opportunity where they can focus on each other and forget whatever the tension is and talk to each other as people, human beings, and try to get to know each other.
Sure.
And just listen to each other. Right? And the same thing with young people. I think they want to be blessed by their parents, their mother, their father, or they want to feel blessed. They want to feel respected, honored. All of those are positive things that we can focus on right now. This is great news, what you're sharing, both of you. I mean, there is a positive to all of this, and then there are negatives, which people are very concerned about. So, Joni, your work that you've done on Alive to Thrive, it's all about suicide prevention and like that. It's, as I mentioned, it's one of the best I've ever seen. I haven't seen anything that tops the research amount of time that you put into it. Explain that to us, and how can a parent get that information?
Great, thanks for asking. And Alive to Thrive is a biblically based suicide prevention and response program, but I want to be really clear, that does not mean that a child is sitting in front of you and that child says, I'm thinking about suicide, and now you go online and this resource is only to help prevent suicide. That's really not what it is. We present what good mental health is and how that starts from mother and father infant bonding. And so we don't really talk about suicide and how to respond to it until you get way deep, almost to the end of the resource. So it talks about self-care, about good mental health, about how communication skills that can help kids have better mental health and coping skills and so forth. And then we start unwrapping things like depression, anxiety, different diagnoses and so forth, and then talk about suicide at the end. So that is a free resource. Focus on the Family made the decision to make it a free resource so that money would never be a hindrance to people getting access to it. It's totally available online at www.alive2thrive.com. And if you go in there, you can hit training and you'll see the different modules that you can go through. It was specifically designed for parents, pastors, teachers, coaches, people who are in an influential position with kids. So they would know how to help them from the youngest ages. And it would included input from 18 clinical professionals. So everyone who contributed to that information was a licensed mental health professional.
Well, I know your team was amazing, and you leading that team. We're thrilled to have your information on. But what are for parents that are concerned about this with their young people, or perhaps there's young people that have contemplated, had maybe some death wish thoughts? What are some of the signals that we need to be attentive to, be aware of?
Certainly when kids are presenting as being really lonely, if you see major changes in their behavior, in their friend group, etc., if they're isolating a lot, I'd be very concerned. We look for things like they're either not eating or eating too much, they're not sleeping or sleeping too much, and for sure changes in their mood. If it's someone who's been pretty stable and there are a lot of tears or yelling or outbursts, those kinds of things, we get concerned. Increased alcohol use, increased drug use, etc. And there are a couple of things that I would say for sure that I really want to emphasize, because in terms of the suicide piece, we unfortunately often have kids who die by suicide where everyone around them is shocked and totally surprised. And probably the biggest reason for that is because there's a combination of two things that are normal in adolescence and teenage and college ages, that are actually healthy if used the right way, but not so healthy when it comes to someone struggling. And that's invincibility and impulsivity. So we love that kids believe that they're not going to die. That's what allows them to take risks and try things and grow. Glenn was talking before we started, where probably just a few people were listening, about liking things that are very dangerous, like rock climbing, or potentially dangerous, rock climbing, rock climbing, and what were you saying, Glenn?
Skateboarding and mountain bike riding.
Mountain biking, skateboarding and mountain biking. Any place we could fall and get bloody, right?
Yeah, right.
And so that's what helps people to make those, to really take those risks and so forth and grow. And then we have impulsivity, which is something that's very normal at that age. And what we know is that when we talk to people who have tried to die by suicide and thankfully haven't, they tell us two things. Number one, they did not really believe that they were going to die. They just don't believe it, because young people don't believe, I'll come through. I may hurt myself, but I may be in the hospital. I'll come through. And then impulsivity, that something happens at a certain time and they haven't quite yet developed to be able to stop that impulse. So if you put those together, I don't believe I'm going to die and I feel really awful today. How can I end the pain? That's why we end up with some kids who you couldn't tell that they were moving in that direction. And it was really, in fact, it may be, I broke up with my girlfriend, that we would think as adults is not something that should push someone over the edge, especially when you say, how long were you dating? And someone says a week. But in their mind, that is tragic because they don't have as much life experience. So that's the reason that often this will happen. So for parents, that's why, as Glenn was saying, you got to relate to your kids, you got to talk to your kids, you got to communicate so that you have that ongoing line of communication open and can start to see and hear if they're really hurting and struggling.
Yeah.
Yeah, being sensitive. What about asking questions of young people if you're a parent, or if you're a high school or college student asking a friend if you're suspicious, is that okay? And
absolutely.
How do you pose the question?
Very directly. It's totally appropriate to say, are you thinking of hurting yourself? If kids aren't, they'll say, gosh, no, why would you ask me that? If they are, they will be relieved that someone cared enough to ask. So asking questions. The other thing relationally is with kids, try in other cases not to spend too much time throwing lots of questions at them. Kids don't like that. The who, what, when, where, why, how, kind of like, you're interrogating.
Yeah.
Say things like, tell me about, I'd love to hear, things like that, that open up the opportunity for them to talk about whatever they want to.
Yeah.
What
I'm sorry, Glenn, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what do you think, Joni, about because different people have different opinions about this, but like you as a parent, you see a story in the news and to go like, oh my goodness, I mean, look at what is happening in Cleveland with these kids. I mean, Franklin, what do you think about that? I mean, what hope is there for these kids? And that it's not on them, but it allows that conversation and it depersonalizes it. Is that an effective way to sort of bring up that topic from parents?
It is. It's really effective. And the other thing that's effective for parents is to start to give kids hope, because they are online a lot and they are looking at news stories. And oh my gosh, we all know that sensational sells. And it kind of makes me crazy, because every time there's one incident, and maybe it could be a small incident or a big incident, and then it gets played over and over and over and over, and it has the effects psychologically as if it's happened over and over and over, even though it was just that one incident. So one thing I want to mention to you is that even though we hear scary stuff and we hear a lot of awful things that are happening for kids, there is great hope. If kids get help early, there is so much help out there. And there statistically, for instance, for every 25 kids, young adults, teens, what have you, who try to die by suicide, one actually dies. Now that's a tragic death, but it means that 24 live. With early help, actually, the hope is so great. There are so many great treatments and things available mental health wise, but also being part of a group, being in a youth group, or having a pastor pour into a kid, having mentors pour into kids and so forth. Those things are really powerful. It is not hopeless. There is a lot of hope.
There is so much hope. A couple of things, and both of you, I think, can address this. Joni, you mentioned from the time the child was born, that first year. I was reading in an article the other day, one of the journals on this topic, that the first year is very critical with bonding, touch, holding. That child, it builds something into them, their self-confidence, their sense of being, and all of that. But then as the child grows, that nurturing, the affirmation, the bringing hope, to honoring them, not being on the attack of them, but trying to help them and grow in those areas is critical. And then, so I think about that, the things to do, but what about the single parent that doesn't have a father there or a mother to help in those areas? And it's tense, it's hard. But what do they do? Do they find another significant other? Both of you, I mean, that's a question that comes up, single parents, but also how do I do that bond? And how critical is it to bond right from the beginning? And how do I continue that throughout their childhood?
You want to take that, Glenn?
Why don't you go? Yeah.
Okay. All right. I was thinking about Glenn's wonderful work with families and the importance of fathers and so forth. And he's done some great work around that maybe he can talk about. Absolutely. For single parents, that bonding becomes even more important. And it can become more difficult because typically their time is a little bit more stressed. They may be away more working and so forth. So they have to be much more intentional about spending time with kids. But let me just tell you, you can do that in moments, and those moments can make huge impressions. A lot of times people feel guilty if they're gone. Gosh, I only have these few moments. But those few moments, if they are intentional, without distractions, without the phone, the TV on, whatever, you are focusing on that child. I have seen many people in single parent situations, moms and dads, be so intentional about the time that they spend with their children. And it has made a huge difference. My children are in their later 30s, and so they're old enough to now be very honest about looking back what was good, what wasn't. And it's so cool to listen to them talk about many things that their dad and I did that we thought would be really important to them that were, I mean, they liked them, but over and over and over, you hear them say, man, I remember this great conversation I had with dad once. And it might have been 10 minutes, but just him stopping what he was doing, totally focusing on them, communicating to them, you are the most important thing to me right now, was really significant.
Yeah, what I'm hearing you say is even if you don't have the quality time, you can have, I mean, you want quality
Quantity.
time, whether you might not have quantity time, but you have quality time.
Right.
And those little moments, the 5 minutes here, the 15 minutes there, talking to them in their bedroom or wherever, going on a drive, those are so important. Just giving me time.
Right.
And Jim Dobson used to say, "How do you spell love? T-I-M-E." It's others have said that too. But so, Glenn, you had something there to add. I can sense it.
Yeah, and I was gonna add, I mean, Joni said it so well, is do not underestimate just those little bits of time here and there. And we remember from our growing up is like some of the best things that our parents told us were not the wise, big, situated things, but like, just little comment that dad made, little comment that mom made, the way that we just jived with each other. The other is the physicality that, I mean, this is kind of a weird analogy, but you think about like at work, if another coworker touches you, just, like it sends something through your body, either good or bad. I mean, touch is a powerful thing. And that our kids, we don't think about touching them or rubbing their back or, put your feet up in my lap and let me rub your feet while we watch TV. I mean, doctors will tell you the exchange that is happening there is profound.
It is.
And so, parents can gain a lot just by investing in their kids in those simple little ways. And the kids like soaking up that love, soaking up that attention. And that makes a tremendous difference.
Yeah, I have the profound privilege of being able to be close to my grandchildren. One is 8 and one is 5, 8-year-old boy, 5-year-old girl. And we can be really busy. And if I say, hey, let's have story time, my grandkids love to sit down and have story time. And immediately I can predict it when they sit down. Nana, while you're reading, will you scratch my back? They love to have their back scratched and tickled. And I mean, that probably is better to them than if I, got them an ice cream cone.
Right. Yeah, that's so good. We have the same privilege. We have our grandkids and our daughter living with us. Ours are 8 and 4. And it's like, it's great. It's who gets to have that kind of an opportunity? A lot of parents and students are concerned about, I'm going to miss my junior and senior year of school and all those great activities, social activities. And what do you say to them when they feel like they're missing out on those really important things?
Yeah, if I could add to that, I mean, it's important for us to be able to say that, you know what, you missed out. Yeah. I mean, COVID year was an unprecedented year. There's no way to say, well, it's not that big a deal. It's a huge deal.
Big deal.
And a year has passed by without these interactions. We need to be able to say, you know what, you were robbed. It wasn't anybody's fault. It was fate. It was the way the world worked. I mean, I was even just watching the presidential inauguration last week and thinking, President Biden has to wear that mask just like I wear that mask. Sure. I mean, it has hit every one of us. None of us are immune from it. And so to mourn with our kids, and say, yes, this has been, excuse the language, a sucky year.
Yeah.
We have all been robbed of things. But then to try to overcome that, nothing will make it up but hey, how can we interact more with our friends and get together physicality and be able to do, creative sorts of things? But I think that's the first thing, is to say, no, you got ripped off. You got ripped off big, and it's nobody's fault. Nobody, caused COVID. It just happened. And we live in this interesting historical time. And what are we going to do the best we can do in light of it?
Glenn, I'm so glad that you said that, because it's true. I think part of what's happening is parents feel bad, and then when their kids express how bad they feel, it's that added burden for a parent, and they kind of want to make it go away. So they say things like, yeah, it's not so great, but we all got to get over it, and kind of very unintentionally discount it.
Right.
And I have had so many conversations with parents to say, we've got to start with empathy. Take yourself back to being in high school, and how long have you thought about the senior prom? How long have you thought about that championship basketball game that you might be a part of? How long have you thought about walking in graduation? And so the kids have gone through so many losses. College kids, they
Right.
didn't get to graduate after so many years. And then, I mean, what do you do after graduation? Usually you're looking for a job. So you got kids who didn't get to graduate. They didn't get to look for a job because so many jobs went on the freeze, and, companies just started freezing jobs and so forth. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, I'm out of school. I have student loans that are going to come due very soon, and I don't have a job, and I need to move back with mom and dad. It's not a bad thing. And as Glenn mentioned before, a lot of families are connecting in great ways, but it's not what they expected. And anytime life throws you a curve from what you expect, it's a loss. It's hard. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. I think we have to empathize with them.
Perhaps adding in there too, talking about it in a realistic way like we have. Of course, historically, there's been many other times in history that there's been crisis events.
Sure.
In times that it's very difficult on the world population or a country's population. But I mean, we understand that, but when you're going through it as a young person, it's difficult, no question. And maybe a question could be asked like, I really understand. You're absolutely right. It is a bummer. Do you have any ideas of what we could do to have fun, to create social? Maybe it's after the COVID crisis, maybe in a few months, we just have a huge party, someplace. A bunch of parents get together and throw this great big party, and we do some things it's not going to make up for what your loss was, but you're not ignoring it, you're acknowledging it, and then you're coming up with suggestions of what they could do that would feel good.
And Wade, that idea of putting something out there in the future to look forward to. I mean, winter always comes, it's always cold, it's all, but summer is going to come, and summer is going to come here too. And we need to be able to put that out in front of our kids. Let's put something on the horizon to look forward to, and have fun talking about the creativity of that, and do it with your kids. I mean, what would you like to do when this is all over? And then see about realizing that and making that happen, and have fun planning it.
Mm-hmm. Great idea.
Yeah, and I think young people have a huge ability to rebound if they have hope. And
exactly.
I kind of package discouragement gives me energy. I might be discouraged, but what can I do about it? And gives me energy to do something and also help others. And, a disappointment, I think of, well, that's happened there, but I can go somewhere where I feel good about the next appointment. And so looking at it as an optimist, we're creating the image of God. When we know Christ, we have the Holy Spirit dwelling in us. We have the mind of Christ. So creativity is there. And every opportunity that we lose, there's a new opportunity. If we, and that can be a valuable lesson for young people to learn. It gives them energy. I think we have one of the greatest generations that's ever lived. They have more potential than any other generation because look at the tools in their toolbox.
Yeah.
You know, with all the social networking abilities, they are brilliant. And where the future goes, I am very optimistic about it with this.
Yeah, and you know, it's a natural antidepressant actually for people who are struggling with depression to help other people who are struggling. It's kind of strange. You think it would be the opposite that would bring them down, but usually people who are depressed feel as if they're worthless, as if they're not good for anything, they're not helping. And so actually getting them out to help is a really great thing. And there are so many groups of people who need help right now that it kind of kills two birds with one stone. Basically, it helps that depressed person, but it also meets a need of someone else.
So true.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting a lot of questions in here. Glenn, go ahead and say what you're going to say, but we're getting a lot of questions, and so I'm going to get moving to that at some point here.
Yeah, no,
We're getting
ahead,
questions. You've hit a hot button.
Yeah, go ahead, Wade.
What about, I have a 7-year-old boy that actually had a plan to take his own life.
Mm-hmm.
That they in the question mark, you know, like, what do I do?
Right, right. Well, clearly, thank God that you know that he had a plan and he's still with us. I'm so glad to hear that as opposed to it happen. So clearly that's a little boy who needs help. Clearly probably some counseling, some mental health support. And so I would encourage for sure to have him assessed by a licensed mental health professional. It's unusual for a child that young to be thinking about taking his life. But as I said before, there's also a lot of hope because the earlier you intervene, the greater the opportunity for that child to get better. So you could try talking possibly with a pastor to see if they have resources in the community that they would recommend. You could try a mental health center. Also Focus on the Family has a whole staff of licensed mental health counselors. And I've been a mental health professional, dually licensed for over 33 years now. And I know the people on the counseling team, they are solid, good, very qualified people, good experience, all licensed. And you can call Focus on the Family at 1-855-771-HELP, which is 4357, 1-855-771-4357, Monday through Friday, Pacific time between the hours of, let's say, 5 a.m. and 7 p.m., and request to talk to a counselor. And that counselor, now you don't hear this very often, it's free of charge, will provide a free consultation and talk with you. And if the counselor feels like you or your child needs extra help, they have access to licensed mental health professionals who are also Christians all over the country. So I would encourage you to call that line and get some help.
What an opportunity. I just encourage people to call your helpline because it's one of the best I've ever seen. I get questions from people different parts of the country that's looking for a counselor. I always go on your website, look for a counselor, or call the helpline and ask for a referral in that part of the country.
Right.
That's great answers. Thank you.
Sure.
A youth leader is asking the question that their personal depression is difficult to deal with, and they're trying to help other students deal with depression as well. So is there any advice for this youth leader that's contacted us?
Yeah, you know, I would say that in your life, whomever you are, there is never going to be an end to people who need help. And so if you are struggling, I would encourage you to step back and take some time away from the kids that you are helping to get yourself help. Because if not, what will happen is you will just keep getting dragged down further and further and further, affected by what's going on by that to them. And therefore you won't be effective and you're not going to help yourself either. We cannot give from an empty tank. And so I would encourage you to get help, step back, take a little time. It's a great modeling for kids to be able to say, I'm struggling too. I need to take care of myself so that I can be better with you. And then obviously work with your church pastors and so forth to try to help to find someone else who is in a position of feeling as if they can give to help those kids.
Yeah, that's great advice. I've mentioned before that, about 25 years, I went through a year of clinical depression, and it was my fault. I'd gone years without a vacation, day off. It was all about helping people constantly. And finally, the Lord said, if you're not going to lay down to rest, I'm going to lay you down. And so, but I came out of that. I worked with a wonderful clinical psychologist that said, I'm going to reprioritize your life. And so I developed this whole rhythm of life. But I said this to other leaders, that you have to love your neighbor as you love yourself. If you're not caring for yourself, you can't care for anybody else. And so, and I also think of this, that hurt people hurt people. And so if we're hurting, if we're wounded, get ourselves fixed, counsel, there's wonderful counselors. So those are some of my thoughts. And I really appreciate what you're saying. Leaders, especially leaders, need to get help when they're feeling these kinds of symptoms and kind of back off. Everybody's under stress, but you add on the responsibility of leading others, and especially that are struggling in these areas, it's important to care for yourself.
And to understand that it is not a weakness to ask for help, but a tremendous strength to ask for help. And that's important. And the other is, I mean, God has fashioned us in such a way that just simply other people around us is such a balm and is such a, and Satan knows it, isolation and aloneness, and I'm the only one dealing with this, is one of his greatest tools. So push that away, this idea that you're alone, that, nobody cares, and seek out other people. And as parents, and Joni, you said this earlier, is, for adults, to understand, like, Johnny or Betsy is not my kid, they're that person's kid, but your influence in their life can be so much more profound than you can imagine. And to step in and say, hey, you know what, I think that kid could use a friend, or I think that kid could, non-parents, in sociology, we call them scaffolding parents or satellite adults, that come alongside other parents and help their kids. Adults, you can have a tremendous impact on young people that way.
Right. We have a question I'm going to blend. We have two questions I'm going to blend into one because they're in the ballpark. We have a parent that are students that are struggling when they're depressed, but when they go home, the family's dysfunctional. So what do they do? And then another one tagging onto it, what do we do as parents when we have our own struggles and we have a young person in our home that's struggling with depression? They kind of fit together, but I thought I'd throw them both out at the same time.
Sure. Well, I would say, again, whoever is having difficulty should seek that help. And I want to say, too, that sometimes people get help from good, trusted, godly men and women, friends, pastors, etc. That I agree with Glenn. There is no shame in asking for help. It's a sign of strength, actually. But there are places to get help other than a mental health professional. So certainly check those resources out. But if you find that you're still running up against a dead end, for sure, try to reach out and get some of that help. And it's okay also to be honest with our kids. In fact, kids love it when their parents are honest. I know that there is an extended family system within my family that's had a lot of difficulty during this pandemic. And one of the things they said that has been really helpful is to model for their children, you know what, we're sorry. We know that you've heard mom and dad arguing a lot. We're struggling too, but that is not your problem. We're going to get some help. And so that was a really good model for them to help those children get help as well. And I think here's the other thing I would say, if you're talking about the other piece where the kids are really struggling, schools have wonderful resources available. Not all schools, some of the smaller Christian schools don't have the resources, but public schools do have school social workers, school psychologists, counselors, and so forth. And they really understand what's going on. And even if it's virtual during the pandemic, tap into those folks because they are free of charge. They're paid by the school district and they have a lot to offer.
That's wow, that's a great answer. I know this church, and I want to thank Pastor Doug and Crystal Heisel, this church, that really they're supporting this and promoting this throughout the whole Bay Area. They have a counseling center at this church.
Great.
Yeah, newlifeinfo.com. And then they also have about 100 small groups, more than 100, that are smaller groups of people that there's relationships. And so part of that is helping one another, listening, being with one another. So they're using very creative ways to do that. Just an FYI with our viewers here. I have a young person that's asking the question, a young adult, I should say. They're asking the question, why would God let this happen? We're trying to serve the Lord. We're trying to do our best. We're trying to help people, but where's God in all of this? And, you know, I know both of you are not only professionals as family helpers, but you're also theologians, and I am as well. So, Glenn, what do you think? What do you say?
Yeah, I was actually even thinking about that yesterday of like, you know, God, you can do anything. You can flip this switch or this switch. Flip this switch off, you know, just make life easier. But that is the whole thing that we have to understand. I mean, not to get highfalutin with this, but the cross is the center of the Christian story. The cross is a bad thing. God lost his only son on the cross, you know? So we have to know that God himself is acquainted with suffering, with difficulty. And we don't know why that is, but we know that he is a God that suffering doesn't take him by surprise. It's not stronger than he is, but he can relate in that suffering with us. We are not God. We don't know why he allows these things and why all of life is just not like one big party. But he experiences it with us, and that there is meaning in the midst of it. And I think that's the important thing, is that the Christian story provides meaning and it provides context in the midst of this kind of suffering. And I've, you know, walked as a Christian for 35 years. And I think that's one of the greatest things that I take away from that, is that Christianity takes suffering and difficulty very seriously, and it provides answers for that.
Right.
Yeah, and I want to be careful how I say this, because I know there are people in the audience probably right now who may be experiencing the greatest suffering they ever have. So I want to make sure that you understand that, having suffered myself and having walked through suffering with a lot of people, I think the best you can do is be where you are, feel how you feel, give yourself permission to feel that, and recognize that God is with you in all of that. And if you have to rage at God or cry or whatever you have to do, I encourage you to be honest with the Lord in that. I will tell you that 2015 was the worst year of my life. My daughter almost died. My aunt, uncle, and mother did die. Because my aunt, uncle, and mother were older, it was a loss, but it was expected. My daughter was very different. It was a very different situation. And I spent many hours in my closet. I never asked why, because as Glenn said, I really recognize that suffering is a part of life. So it wasn't like, why me, God? Because, well, why not? Why would I be the first person ever who hadn't suffered? But I did a lot of venting and a lot of talking with God. And the next thing I'm going to say, I want to be careful to say, I understand that when you're in the midst of this suffering, this is not going to make sense. So don't put this pressure on yourself. But I will tell you that I used to hear in the midst of that very difficult year, I'd hear from people, when you get on the other side of this, there are things that God will have taught you. And boy, that is the truth. I learned to be more dependent on God. I learned to give up things that I thought were important that really aren't. And I also felt like I developed a deeper relationship with the Lord because I really did feel his presence in my suffering, recognizing that I was hurting, making his decision not to fix it the way I wanted to fix it or in the time that I wanted it to be fixed. But I really felt the presence of the Lord there and that he was right there. And as Glenn said, he knows, he suffered more than any of us will ever understand. When you think he suffered for the weight of sins of the world for all time. Wow, we can't even fathom that. So it's difficult if you're in the midst of it. I encourage you to walk through it, not to try to avoid it, not to try to walk around it, not to try drugs or alcohol or something to fix it, to walk through it and seek the Lord's presence to help you through it.
So true. And I think our Heavenly Father, when we're hurting, he hurts. He's our Father. His name is compassion, mercy, kindness, graceful, grace, and all of those. And so when we hurt, he hurts. We're his child. It's like when my children are hurting or my grandchildren are hurting, I always say, I wish it were me.
Sure.
I don't want them to go through this. And so I think there's incredible empathy that we don't understand. It's so deep, it's so wide from our Heavenly Father. And another thing I remind myself is earth is not heaven. Earth is a nasty place. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. I love living on this earth, but it's full of lots of confusion and compromise and people that are mixed up and people that are hateful. But we're the church. We're Christians. We are the light of the world. We go through the same things that non-Christians go through many times, but we want to use that as an opportunity to show them our Christ-like life. And I know that's my response is the superficial. Because some people are they're hurting a lot right now, but we care about you out there. And one last question, if I could ask before our time goes up and it ends here, is how do you identify depression in young adults, young kids? So I'm feeling this question, sensing this question is coming from a parent of a preschooler or elementary age, something like that. How do you recognize it?
That's a really good question because we don't hear about that a lot. I would say whenever children are not connecting with other kids, that's a concern because children naturally want to connect. They want to, as Glenn was saying, be physical. They want to touch, they want to hug and so forth. If you see them distancing, if they appear to be afraid of other people or afraid of a lot of different situations, often anxiety will come before depression. Sure. And then I would say same kinds of things that if they're not eating, if they're not sleeping, that sort of thing. If they have bouts of crying or yelling or screaming that are not what we would consider normal, because kids do cry more than young children cry more than older kids do. They scream more than older kids, but most people have a sense of what's normal and what isn't. And if you don't know, you can usually ask friends and other people, what do you think about this? Does this look normal to you, etc.? Certainly kids in most cases, if they haven't experienced trauma or don't have depression for some other reason, they're fun, they're joyful, they're seeking new experiences and so forth. So if you see a child that is not seeking those experiences, or a child maybe has started to regress developmentally, so that child was speaking really well and then stops not speaking, and doesn't appear to be any physical reason, those are the kinds of things I'd be concerned about. Always looking for patterns.
Yeah.
Sure. Those kinds of things, changes in behavior. So if it's bedwetting, and maybe it's after something happened, a divorce or something like that, you could make a guess that that might have something to do with it, especially if it hadn't occurred previously.
Yeah, both, could you give us 5 more minutes? Both of you,
Sure,
we're
sure,
getting so many questions in.
sure. I
Uh,
can give you as much time as you need.
People are loving you. And so one question that came up was about the political environment. Is that impacting young people today? I know I just don't watch news anymore. I look on my iPhone at the news for like 5 minutes every morning. I just want to know what's going on. Then I'm off. I just don't watch any news. I try to stay positive in my little world. But what impacts political climate having on young people, do you think?
You know what? I mean, that is one thing that is as untalked about as it is strong. And I don't know what it is. I mean, I have some ideas, but the division between kids and their parents over political issues, and not just like in the old days of like, well, you're wrong and I can't believe you believe that, but like just cut off mom and dad. You know what? I am not going to talk to you if you believe that. It is profound.
Yeah.
And I don't understand it. I don't know what it's about. But if parents are experiencing that, you are not alone. It is an odd, curious sort of thing. I wonder that, the passing of one political era going into another, that maybe it might detoxify. I don't know, but it's a curious thing, and I've never seen it before.
Right, right. Me
I
too.
think that a lot of it, frankly, again, goes back to what kids are exposed to in the news. And by the news, I mean on their Twitter feeds, on their social media, on the way they experience news. And as we know, a lot of that is incorrect on both sides of the political spectrum. I'm not choosing sides here at all. There is, whether you call it fake news, misinformation, whatever, it exists on both sides. But remember that parents have more history, and we have a better ability to be able to interpret what's going on. Whereas kids, depending on their age, the younger they are, the more impressionable they are.
Sure.
And they can hear things maybe said by someone that they identify with, a music star, or a movie star, or a TV star, or someone that they really identify, who says, this is the way it is. And, kids always tend to rally around the people that they identify with. But we've had so many famous people out there making really strong political statements. And I think that's a part why kids have aligned with certain people. And then they've been very much encouraged to kind of take up a cross, so to speak. And if you don't agree with this 100%, then there's something wrong with you. And so it's almost become, I think, part of their identity in a way that it didn't used to be. It's amazing to me, and Sue, and that's interesting, Glenn, that you were talking about her, Twenge. I always thought it was twenge. I have followed her research for years, but you said twenge? Is
Twingie,
that
yes,
Twenge? That's
uh-huh.
great. I would love to meet her sometime. She has done amazing research, but certainly she is one who's done a lot of research in terms of the effects of social media and so forth on kids. And just that whole identity issue and what they identify with. And I just think that we have to remember that they are coming from a shorter span of life than we are. We have a lot of things to filter our thoughts through, and they don't have as many. They tend to be zeroed in on what's online, and that's about it. And I think that's what's causing a lot of the confusion and a lot of the, hey, I believe this, and if you don't believe that, you're wrong. I mean, some of these kids are listening to podcasts, listening to influencers online for many hours a day.
the whole cancel culture thing that seems to be growing. I spoke to a group of young leaders a couple of weeks ago, and that question came up, what do you think about cancel culture? And my response was, maybe I oversimplified it, but it's the way I look at these things. There's over 5,000 cultures in the world today, probably a lot more than that, but that we know of. And so there's every culture has a different opinion. And so I belong to a kingdom. That's where my citizenship is, in heaven. And I'm a Christian, and I believe in a theocracy. I want God to rule everything because I know he's a loving God. He's a merciful God. And so God gives us the ability to have freedom of speech, to make choices, make decisions, have debates, discussions. But so canceling out culture, how do you do that? And so as a Christian, it's just part of the world we live in, but we belong to another culture. It's called the kingdom of God. And what a privilege we have. And I look at cancel culture, I said, oh boy, let me at it, make my day. I want to explain to them what real culture is in the Lord. But sorry, I'm getting excited there. A little bit of preacher in me tonight. But one last question, my dear friends. And this question I've heard come up in many different ways. But how do you convince some older generations that mental health treatment is a positive direction for their life? That's the question. So, I mean, like, I'm over 60. And so I don't mind going to a counselor if I need to. I have lots of them, like you guys, that are my friends. I just run across them.
Well, it's true. It's interesting because I wonder if that question came from someone who's younger. One of the things I was going to say earlier when you were talking about good things about the younger generation, both of you talked about it. One of the things is they are not hung up about going to counseling. And that's because they've been surrounded by people who've been struggling and going to counseling. And people say, oh, I learned this from my counselor, or hey, my counselor said this, or hey, I'm going to my counseling appointment. And there's no shame. And so it's been reinforced in that youth culture that it's a good thing. But what young people need to understand is when you and I were growing up, because I'm of that age as well, that wasn't the case. In fact, it was usually presented as if you're weak and there's something wrong with you if you go to see a counselor. And being a mental health professional, I can tell you that I will tell people it's like going to another class. You're just going and learning about life. You don't necessarily go to counselor because you're in crisis. That may be a reason, but that's not the only reason. So I think I would turn that around and I would say to someone who's talking to an older person, hey, this is, first I'd ask the question, why are you afraid to go to a counselor, and kind of find out what their concerns are. And you'd probably hear some misconceptions. I know that many people in that older age group, they have an image, if they've never been to a counselor, that only comes from movies and the presentation of psychologists and social workers and so forth in movies, which is usually like anything else, it doesn't present reality. So they really think they're going to go in to a counselor's office. First of all, they're going to lay down on a couch and some guy with a long beard, kind of like Sigmund Freud, is going to sit behind them and go, tell me about your grandmother. And I mean, that could happen, but it's very unlikely. It's basically, you sit down.
I'm going to talk to you about your id and your.
You have a conversation. You're just having a conversation with someone who can listen and is there to hear you. So probably there's something that they've heard about counselors or therapists or psychologists that scared them, and it's a matter of educating them about what it really is.
Yeah, and any of the elderly people that are watching, I mean, us AARP peers, that's a group that we belong to when we're over 52. So I've been a member of that for a long time. But any of us, I believe in counselors. I would have no hesitation to talk, and I have my favorites that I know, people like you guys, but I have no hesitation, no worry about it. And they're some of the best friends I have because they listen and they're honest with me. And so they help me in great ways. We are out of time, and I'm so grateful for you. One question that did come in, and I feel like I can answer it this way. Parents, as their in their homes, they can't bring their young people to church and like that. Some discipling tools that would be recommended, how parents can do this versus the church. And I've always felt as a pastor that discipling, should primarily happen in the Christian home because, at church we get 1 hour on Sunday, maybe 2, and maybe an hour during the week if there's youth services and groups and like that. But really, it happens at home if you have Christian parents. If you don't, there's all kinds of tools out there. And I know whenever I'm looking for a tool like this or helping someone, marriage or family, whatever, I go to Focus on the Family, your website, and I ask the question like discipleship tools for young people. And an answer comes up there with an article, a book, or something,
Definitely.
a link that's going to take me to my answer. And sometimes there's multiple links. So that is the first place I go, always.
Great.
Focus on the Family. And so you have so many materials. And well, Doctor, thank you, Joannie and Glenn.
Welcome.
What a great time this has been. And I just feel that you've helped a ton of people tonight. You've helped me. And I thank you for your time. I want to thank Doug and Crystal Heisel, the pastors of this church, that really encourage these kind of experiences to happen. And let's pray as we close for our parents and people that are watching. Father, we're so grateful for this information that you've given to very smart people that love you. And so, Lord, as they help people, I pray you'd bless them. And Lord, if anyone is there that's really feeling a lot of emotional pain, mental health challenges, I pray that you would help them seek help from another Christian person or professional. And Lord, that you would help them. You have all kinds of creative ways to help people. And so I pray you do that tonight in the name of Jesus. And if you have any questions that's watched, those that are watching, please email the church, New Life Church in Alamo or Dublin, California. It's on a website, so you can go there, get all the information you want, and also view our previous podcast. Thank you so much, friends, and God
Thank you.
bless you. Yeah, thank you very much.